Let's start with what's happening, and let's first begin, if you will, with the role of a journalist in times of crisis. 2 days ago, I was at the funeral of Giselle Khouri, which was a very somber occasion because everyone there, I think, is mourning many things at once. It feels like there's a passing of a generation, a passing of October 17 too, and then you have the remnants of March 14 that embraced both in the church together mourning, of course, surrounded by a regional war that we're on the brink of all the time. 5 days ago, a friend of ours, but you knew him better than me, Aissam Abdallah, killed by an Israeli missile doing his job. I think that type of fundamental role for journalism is so vital and it's so important. And I want to begin there. With your role as a journalist, you're somebody that has survived immense pain and tragedy in this country. We're going to get into that in the book as well. But your perspective on the role of journalism during what's happening.
To be honest, Roni, the past 10 days have made me think a lot about being a journalist. I think when Aissam was killed and I saw Reuters' reaction to that, when they tweeted in the very first hour saying he has been killed, I said to myself, why am I a journalist? I had been watching Western media covering the war on Gaza for many days, feeling outraged by the bias, by the lack of coverage on the other side. We're taught in journalism school, and I went to Columbia, I went to one of the best journalism schools in the world, to be impartial, to be unbiased, to be balanced, but to speak the truth. So we need to be impartial, but we have to be truthful. And I'm worried that that's not what's happening today. I kept thinking, I just want to give up. I don't want to be a journalist anymore because journalism and Western media and a lot of media organizations were not doing what we're taught to do. Our mission is, again, to be impartial but truthful, and they were not being truthful. So it was very, very hard, and I try through social media to fill in that gap. I mean, I don't have a lot of followers, maybe like 30,000 or something. That's nothing. But to give context, because that was missing a lot from the coverage.
I thought my 12,000 were worth something.
The first few days, I understand there was a lot of outrage and shock after the Hamas attack. But you would watch the media, the Western media again, and you would see families, victims, a lot of pain on one side, and a bunch of buildings and terrorists on the other side. That was the narrative. And it felt like history started on October 7, when it's 75 years of systemic oppression. Palestinians under occupation. And it's a conflict that's decades old. It didn't really start on that day. And I didn't see that narrative. I didn't see the history. I didn't see the context. So it was very enraging, and I felt very helpless. And I know there are a lot of brave journalists today who are speaking up, but everyone is paying the price. There are BBC journalists under investigation, including 2 Lebanese. There's a Guardian cartoonist that has been sacked from his job. There are MSNBC anchors, Arab anchors that were taken off air. So these are very challenging times for journalists who, I'm not saying, you have to take sides, but you have to show what is happening on the other side as well. And again, you have to be truthful. We were told to speak the truth no matter on what side the truth is. And we don't see that today. We feel like the Western media specifically, I'm not saying the rest is innocent, but I'm focusing on that because this is what I've been monitoring and this is where I've worked most of my career, unfortunately are not doing that. And where was the outrage? Where was the shock? The past decades, we haven't seen anything like that. And I know that the violence today is unprecedented on both sides, but it's unfair. It's unfair to forget, what has been happening throughout. And so I was telling you yesterday, I hosted someone just to talk about Gaza before even Hamas was born. I think history and context is important, and it's part of what we do as journalists, to document and to give context.
So I'll plug him. His name is Zachary Foster. He happens
Yeah.
to be a friend of ours. I hope you're able to upload that video at some
Not yet.
point.
It's when
Yeah.
I go back to France because the connection is failing me
And I
now.
think he'll be watching this episode.
Yeah.
He's also great at maps. He's
Yeah.
actually, I think, an astute researcher. So he has an archive to look at. Let me get into narrative then. A war of narrative. Do you see this as part of the journalist's role? Maybe, in your sense, offering a counter narrative to what you think is misinformation. Is that something you absorb as part of your profession?
Yeah, this is what we have to do. We have to look for the truth, even if it's not out there, even if it counters all the narratives that are already there. This is our job. Maybe not every journalist, but at least investigative journalists or journalists who've covered this conflict and know the context. So you have to look for evidence, you have to find the truth, and you have to put it out there, even if it upsets everyone. And this is what's happening, is that when some journalists are trying now to do that, they're being sidelined, taken off air, they're being censored. And we've seen that there's literally a crackdown on freedom of speech. There's a war of misinformation and a war on freedom of speech that's ongoing with this war in Gaza. Even the algorithm on social media. I spoke to someone at Meta yesterday and they acknowledged the shadow banning. They said, we fixed it. It was a bug. We fixed it in the weekend. Let me know if it's still happening to you. Tons of colleagues reporting, their stories not being seen, their posts not getting any exposure because of certain keywords and, the content. This is not acceptable.
I heard it as almost hyperbole. If you write Palestine, there's a shadow ban.
Or Gaza or Hamas.
Or Gaza, yeah. So was it, in your conversation, was it at that level of just geography or even naming a group?
No naming also. There were keywords, apparently Hamas, Gaza, Palestine. If you use Israel, actually, you get more exposure. So there are people who
Meta
tested.
acknowledge this?
No, they didn't acknowledge
okay.
this. They acknowledged the shadow banning.
I see.
That's
Yeah.
someone at Meta who told me, let me know if it's still happening. We fixed it.
Can I have Mark's number?
Sorry?
Can I have Zuckerberg's number? Who are you talking
I don't
to?
have, no, it's someone from the Middle East team that I know.
Mark Zuckerberg? No, I'm kidding. No.
And you know that EU leaders also submitted a request to X, to Elon Musk,
Yeah.
to control certain content. So that's also coming from somewhere. But it's dangerous. I think these algorithms, we've seen they've done a lot of damage during elections and now during war as well. Showing people only what they want to see and not showing them what the other narrative is and what the other side is saying. That's very, very dangerous.
So let's go as deep as we can without making this subject for tonight. Could you, and I'm not saying I disagree or even agree, how would you best sum up the narrative you're trying to deliver in terms of what you see as bias, which is, I think, dominating a lot of at least Western coverage? How do you...
You mean, how do I describe the narrative in the West?
No. How would you counter? In other words, what are you trying to explain to them? That
what I'm trying to do only through my social media, because I don't cover the Middle East anymore. And God knows if I'm keeping my job in France. I don't know. But I'm trying to stick to facts and historical context. That's what I've been trying to do, to show people that no matter what your position is towards Hamas, and I posted something that went completely viral saying that you could not support Hamas and Hezbollah, but still support Palestinians' right to resist and, to self-determination and decry occupation. So I'm just trying to show people that this violence started 75 years ago. And it's the result of, as I said, systemic oppression and colonization. And these are not my words. These are the words of international humanitarian and human rights organizations, other governments, the UN. There's no, people accuse me of justifying or being apologetic on both sides, by the way, by just giving mere context and history. This is not what I'm trying to do. You do what you want with the context that I give you, but it's my job to explain to you where that is coming from. It doesn't mean I'm justifying, but you have to understand, why initially Hamas was born in 87. What was there before 87? What's been happening for 75 years in the occupied Palestinian territories? Who is Hamas? I mean, you only hear that they're a terrorist organization. I don't want to go into that debate. I have a personal opinion, of course. But then it's good to know also, for example, what Zachary told me yesterday is that Israel played a role in, Hamas's creation because they wanted to get rid of the PLO back then. And that was, great. It was a charity Islamic organization. They saw in it a way to get rid of the PLO. Not a lot of people know that. And Zachary is basing his statement on facts and evidence and statements made by Israeli officials. So this is the kind of context that you need to know, because vilifying one side only without realizing what the other side has been doing, again, is painting an incomplete and inaccurate picture.
So there's a focus on empirical data, even using social media to that effect.
Yeah, that's the only tool I have at the moment.
And that post, if I remember it right, it's almost like false equivalence and showing truth on
that are not mutually exclusive.
Sorry, yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Which I think that is the role of a journalist.
It resonated a lot with a lot of people. I was shocked how much, but because people don't want to be labeled anymore. Like, they don't want to be called anti-Semitic if they're supporting Palestinians. They don't want to be, accused of supporting terrorism if they're decrying, what's happening now in Gaza, or if they condemn the killing of Israelis because, some people did that they're against, Palestinians' right to self-determination, etc. So a lot of people just, identified with it.
It's hard for me to segue to Lebanon naturally, but I'm going to try, without ruffling any feathers, to see how this topic can be expressed the way you're describing in Lebanon. So forget Western coverage. Let's talk about Lebanese coverage of this kind of conflict here. It almost feels like there's an emotional burden whenever you're trying to speak truth. And I think this kind of issue can tear Lebanon apart always, even on a good day.
It always has.
Yeah. So how is that role here? What is it shaped by in your mind? I think it's harder and harder and harder to find moderation or problem solving in this country.
Yeah.
And I think it's a lost cause, in my opinion. Can you shed any of your opinion on that?
Do you mean the media's stance on this?
Let's take today, for example, or even the last 24 hours. Where you have
I haven't been monitoring closely, to be honest. I know that, there's coverage of what's going on in the south, the protests, what's going on in Gaza to a certain degree.
Let me put it in perspective. Last night, that horrific hospital
the
attack,
massacre,
that's in the background. By midnight, there are protests erupting at embassies mostly. And then today, Lebanese, I think, are familiar with images that spell horror in Lebanon too.
Yeah.
So I guess it's trying to find a way to still speak truth, knowing that many people are going back to their default positions.
But this is the problem. I don't think, because the Palestinians were involved in the civil war, and our collective memory of the civil war is so distorted because there's not one narrative. It's not desensitized from bias and political parties' agenda, that there are still a lot of grievances that are coming out whenever there's something happening. I was just talking to an old lady here in Jamaica who's in my book. And she was like, I was 7 and I remember what the Palestinians were doing in Beirut, and they caused the war. I was like, Siham, they didn't cause the war. Let's talk. If you read my book, you'll understand that it's more complicated.
You're plugging your book
this.
in the middle.
Yeah, and she has the book and she's been reading it. So I think our history and the historical grievances between the different parties with the Palestinians, etc., are still there, and they come out in times like these. And the Lebanese are still divided. But I'll tell you this, I have a feeling this time that a lot of people don't want to be dragged into this again. Talking to people from different political backgrounds, it seems to be the case. That's for sure. For the Western, sorry, I'm so obsessed with the Western media now. For the local media, unfortunately, I think there's a political agenda everywhere. And I think that comes from the political funding. I've worked for local media and I know how it is. And I think the coverage reflects very much that. I mean, everyone says we're pro-Palestinian cause, etc. But if you dig a bit, there are a lot of divisions. So I don't know if I answered your question.
No, you did. I share the sentiment, though, that I don't know if there's data to prove this, but I think there is a popular opinion, majority opinion, of not wanting to be involved directly
In the war, yeah.
in this current war. That's
Yes.
the sentiment. I don't know
That's how I feel as well, talking to people. Yeah.
and talking, and also this is very surface level observation. Even driving around Beirut today, where the highway is blocked,
Yeah.
and I think a lot of these locations are not friendly to Hezbollah, but no one's doing anything to try to cause tensions there.
Yeah.
I think that is happening too. It's almost like a
Yeah, but what's happening in the south is very dangerous because the tit for tat is that for now, but we don't know when it's gonna become more. And there's a daily shelling from both sides.
yeah.
And then, as you know, there's a regional agenda also behind this, in my opinion. And we don't know when there will be orders for this to become more than what it is. It scares me because this is a country that's already, as you know, when you read my book, you see it's completely drained and it's hit kind of a bottomless abyss, if you want, because I don't know where that abyss ends. So people can't afford being in a war. And I think we're already losing because businesses shutting down, people not going out, this tension, we're already paying for it. But if it goes into a full-fledged war, then in 2006, there were Arab countries willing to pay money to rebuild.
Yeah.
That's not going to be the case, I'm afraid, this time. So I don't know. I hope it stays like this and doesn't become worse.
So just one more question before we dive into the book, and I think it's a natural segue anyway. With your opinion in mind, this is a subjective opinion. We can even offer more of this during the Q&A. This is my estimate, and I'd like to hear yours. Again, not an expert. And I think from what you've said so far, you don't claim to be one either when it comes to regional politics.
Not at all. Yeah.
It's a gut feeling that we are not going to be dragged into the war, despite majority sentiment not wanting to be part of the war.
I agree.
And that gut feeling comes less from Lebanon today.
No.
And I'll shape it this way. I see an attack on Iran exposing us to becoming a battlefield on that front. Short of a direct attack in that direction, I understand Hezbollah's calculations as caution today.
I agree.
And this is not a compliment to them. It's
We're observing and we're describing.
Right.
Fairly enough. I don't think they can afford it either domestically or financially. It's not 2006 anymore. And I think they have different calculations. And I think, but the problems with what's happening in the South is that I don't know when it's gonna I agree with you. I have that gut feeling that it's gonna end there, hopefully. But I think anyone who claims they know what's happening, there's not enough intelligence being shared. I speak to other journalists who are like investigative journalists. We don't know. So anyone who claims they know just doesn't know anything, to be honest.
That's well said.
Yeah, everything caught us by surprise, all of this. I don't think a lot of people saw this coming, despite what's been happening, in the occupied territories, etc. I mean, even the security breach in Israel, that I never thought would happen. So
at such an immense level. It's not simple. It's a
the fact that they're untouchable, kind of like that myth is broken.
And I sense it's a psychological victory already in that you can do this to Israel. And I think
for that camp,
yes. And that to me, it's interesting. Everyone seems to be saying there's no direct Iranian involvement with what Hamas did. But that's very careful language.
Yeah. I find it very awkward that the Americans said that their intelligence doesn't point fingers directly to Iran. It makes you wonder a lot because, but I don't know. Again, as a journalist, I don't speculate.
Yeah.
So there's no evidence to this date, at least shared by anyone.
Yeah.
So we don't know.
And then it opens the door to indirect. What does that mean? And clearly the regional touring between Biden and the Iranian foreign minister. His name escapes me now.
Yeah.
You know what it reminds me of? Problem starters become problem solvers. When you create problems in this part of the world, you're usually the power that can end it on their terms.
True.
And I think that's what's happening behind the scenes. But it's speculation at best.
Yeah. Unfortunately, at the expense of so many
Right.
civilians dying. Yeah.
At the expense of so many civilians dying. I think that should be the start for your next book. Because I think this is exactly what has happened to Palestine. And it's everything you write about in
The
All She
Lebanese
Lost.
as well. Yeah.
So in case you want a physical copy, there are plenty for sale on the barrel. I think it's still there in the middle. Yes. So it's available for purchase. Let's go into this book.
Yeah.
Now, I felt actually unqualified at the beginning because there's a sentence in it that this is a book by women for women. So either
You're more than qualified.
I should lose weight. No. I'm more than qualified. Thank you. Samir, you enjoyed that one? Thanks.
You're a feminist, to my knowledge.
Thank you.
So
to your knowledge,
enough.
I appreciate. I don't want to overstep by suggesting that maybe I am still unqualified, but I will try to fully absorb and in a way pay tribute to what you've done. This book is really the last 2 years of your life in writing, and I know that it came out just a few months ago. And I remember when you left this country, you left in pain. And I just know this from your social media that you were reluctantly leaving for a better future for your daughter.
Yeah.
And you made a decision that I think is the right decision, that any mother would give for her daughter, to live a semi-functioning life and a semi-functional state. It's not asking for much.
Yeah.
But you did that. And then yet you're away, you're abroad, and you're still interviewing Lebanese women about this tragedy, which means there's no escape anyway. You're drawn to this story, you're drawn to this country. And I will emphasize that this country is so damn small that when you know too many of these people, it's more heartbreaking.
Yeah.
I sat alone last night rereading the story with Tracy Najjar. And I reread that one because I did an interview with her for my podcast. And sitting next to her was Paul Najjar and their newborn baby.
Aaliya.
Yes, exactly. He had just been born. So he's crying in the background. They're taking turns feeding him, attending to him. And the way you described Tracy, her eyes, that almost coldness to her, that's exactly what I experienced. But you also hint at it because you know her, or at least you've known her before the blast.
Yes, we went together to AUB.
Right.
Yeah.
You could read her that this is a wall behind a flood of pain.
Yeah.
And many stories reflect that kind
and
of
we
thing.
met many times for this book, so it's not like she had this expression only once. It was literally every time I spoke to Tracy that she was so composed and had like this poker face, always owning her narrative. There are a few other women like that in the book, and it fascinated me because they were not sharing their vulnerability with me, whereas others did. But sorry, I knew that they were very vulnerable. You know, sitting with these women was an experience in itself, and I think it was the hardest part about writing this book. It was not the writing. It was these interviews that lasted hours. Some women I went back to see more than once. Some I got really close to. I still see and I speak to almost every day. And sitting there, I felt privileged, but at the same time, I felt very helpless. And I talk about how they reminded me of my grandmother.
Yeah.
Growing up, my grandmother always cried when we were with her, remembering how her husband was killed in 1958. And the man who killed him never served justice. And I remember as a child sitting with my grandmother, I would feel so helpless and I didn't know what to do just listening to her story. I would comfort her, but at some point you're like, I don't know what to do. And I felt this way with with these women. They reminded me of my grandmother. And there was this boundary that we're told to keep as journalists. There was the COVID boundary, by the way. There was social distancing.
Yeah.
But there was also this ethical and journalistic boundary that I ended up breaking because I just couldn't sit there. They cried most of the time, and I talk about it. Interviews could last 2 or 3 hours nonstop crying. It was 1 year after the explosion when I interviewed them. It's when they started kind of acknowledging and processing the trauma. According to psychologists, you only start processing after 6 months. And some of them were speaking for the first time about what happened on that day. There was a doctor and a first aid respondent. It's a burden for me. It's a big responsibility. And I've been trained to interview trauma survivors. I had that training at the UN because I covered Yazidi women in Iraq. But I felt like I wasn't prepared. It was just too much. And I was always so afraid to trigger them, to bring back, the trauma again. It was very delicate. And there's a chapter at the beginning, Lor, the firefighter, the only women other than Sahar, who was on the team. And my interview with Lor ended after like 40 minutes, and I never came back. Lor was not ready to speak. She was so traumatized. It was so clear for me. And she couldn't wait to end the interview. And I just let her go. And she asked me, "Are we done?" I wasn't done. I was like, "Yeah, we're done." I thought it was just too much. It would be like abusing if I asked for more.
Just a comment on two things. It's in your introduction, I believe, where you describe your grandmother, the way you remember her, that there's a bitterness as well. And I found that striking. It's that she's not given the justice she deserves, yet she does everything right. She raises her family to the best of her capabilities. She's a loving person, but when you see her alone, there's a pain in her. And that's so familiar to me in many relatives that don't talk about what happened to them. In her case, it's a direct injury, losing a loved one. But I think many people are not talking about what happened. And this is before the Civil War, 1958, if I'm not mistaken.
It was after the Mizyara
massacre. Right. So that's
like 6 months after that he was shot, but it was a revenge killing for the Mizyara massacre. Yeah.
He's a pharmacist, your grandfather.
Yeah.
Right.
I think, because she couldn't speak, like she spoke to us, but she never found that safe space where she could really speak about it. And I think it's why I wanted to write this book. Is that there's so many women out there, and they're the most powerful storytellers I've ever met, not just in Lebanon, just covering the Middle East. I covered refugees for 4 years. Women are the most powerful storytellers. It's because they rarely have a safe platform to tell their stories.
Let me go there, though, the safe platform. And I don't like to talk too much about me on my podcast, but I'll say, after my father was killed, it took me 4 years to open up about it.
Yeah.
4 years. You're finding a group of individuals that have suffered immensely in this kind of injustice, but they feel comfortable and safe enough to do it with you. So what is the technique? Maybe training is part of it, but I don't think that's the whole picture.
No.
So what are you offering them to feel this level of safety?
Listen, being a woman and being Lebanese, that helps a lot. But I also learned that you have to build trust. And for people to trust you, you need to be very patient. And this is really a mission that challenged me a lot, because people who know me know that I'm very impatient. And so it took me a while to, give space to these women to get to know me. I didn't interview them from the first time.
I see.
I went there, we had a chat, everything off the record. And I make them feel that I care, because I actually really do. I'm not just writing the book because I want to write a book. And also listening to their feedback after the book was written, I know that I did the right thing. I could have, drifted away or did something wrong. Was very worried not to do justice to their stories. But it's patience, and for them to to trust you, you really have to show them that you care. You have to prove that.
So the
And
writing is secondary almost. It's the trust that comes before you're even doing your work.
exactly. And then you show them that you care beyond, after you do the interview. Like, literally, most of them, there are maybe 2 or 3 that I can't get in touch anymore with. They're foreigners. We speak every week. You know, it's I feel like I'm part of their circle now, and I help some of them. And by the way, the proceeds of the book, my proceeds, go to them. And I wouldn't say it's easy. Again, it was very hard, but it took time, and it works. It works. There's maybe one woman that I approached that said no to being interviewed. She was older and she just wasn't ready to open up, the wounds. She's also a survivor of the Civil War. She's alone. It wasn't, she didn't want to. But
I've had people come up to me to want to talk about relatives that died from the blast, but not on the podcast, just in person. The uncle of Ilyas Khouri, a teenager in Marim Khayyed, his uncle just wanted to talk. And
being on camera is a game changer.
Absolutely. And being recorded, I don't think they still...
I was recording, but they knew the recorder. I told them that I was recording, but they just couldn't see it. And I wasn't so keen on the quality. It was just for me because the book there are chunks of narratives out there that haven't been like edited or so. There's even, I'll give you an example. I think at the end, there's a woman that names a president with the wrong name. I kept it as is. This is oral history. You don't change what people say. So I was recording just so that I'm very accurate and I would transcribe as is, but they couldn't see the recorder. Yeah. And then maybe they saw it at the beginning, but when you're there for an hour or two, they just forget it.
Right.
And being on camera, this was a documentary, I'm not sure I would have gone as deep as I did. So it helps print and, not seeing something in front of their face, reminding them that they're being recorded. That's probably why with you it's harder.
It's harder, but I'm honored that anyone reaches out to want to talk. So I still listen. But of course, I think that's the hardest thing to do is, especially, I'll give you my side. When it's a permanent injustice, it's harder to talk about it. When there's no closure, you don't want to open up about it easily. You have to pick and choose who you talk to. So you did the right thing by offering that friendship and trust, and then very subtly maybe showing them that you're somebody that could write about this story. I also noticed, though, in the book, it's not just stories. It's not just women talking about their struggle. You're offering your own analysis, too, and snippets. It's almost like there are certain chapters dedicated to how you see the country that you grew up in and maybe the depth of problems that are so deep today. Are these reflections that come to you after the port blast? Are you seeing certain things as more prescient now than they were before? Because you are, in a way, you're becoming political to a degree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not, I mean...
It's not just recording their stories and leaving it there.
I'm part of the book.
Yeah.
I give my own analysis. I mean, even the historical chapter, they're my own reading of our modern history.
Right.
And I don't claim anywhere that, it's objective but it's every Lebanese case is like this because we don't have, any common history that's been written or taught. It's our own reading of events. And
that type of writing, though, which is breaking from what we talked about earlier, which is just
typical journalism.
Exactly.
It's not. It's
first person narrative.
Yes, it's a first person narrative, and it was a conscious choice because I wanted to do that.
Are these things you've drawn from post blast, being able to distance yourself a bit?
I mean, I never wanted to write a book. I decided to write this after I left. When I was in Paris, it was 7 months after the explosion. I think when you take a distance and you have some kind of peace of mind, you see things differently and you are able to process and put things down in writing. It helps a lot. when you're here enmeshed and like so ingrained in the context, it's hard.
So I had your permission beforehand.
Yes, go
Yeah.
ahead.
There are two passages I'd like you to share tonight. This is the first one. There's ink. I damaged your book intentionally.
No worries. I
And
give
the-
you another one.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
Oh,
And
that's
the ink
long.
extends to the back. So
Okay.
it's just 2 pages where the
Sure.
marker is. So these are introduction page 17 and 18 if anyone has the book with them.
Okay. Many of the stories I wrote about focused on the psychological toll of the blast. In Lebanon, new traumas pile on top of previous ones before you've had time to recover. People who survived the explosion were also survivors of the 2019 economic crisis, the survivors of the many wars with Israel, survivors of the civil war, the political assassinations, and the endless cycles of Lebanon's violence. I began putting together survivor stories, particularly from women, although that was never a deliberate choice at the outset. Many of these women lost everything that day, the most precious people in their lives, their physical and mental health, their homes and livelihoods, their ability to be happy and to feel in any way secure. Mothers who lost their children in the explosion, wives who lost their partners, doctors and nurses, first aid responders, refugees and migrants. Each recalled the moment at 6:08 p.m., sharing the story of their loss and the harrowing details carved into their memories of the day that changed their lives. These women's homes turned into a front line on 4 August. The most secure place in their lives was no longer safe. But the more I listened to them, the more I realized it wasn't just that they had witnessed an apocalyptic moment. Their losses went way beyond the blast. They tell the story of Lebanon's modern collapse and their life as women in it, often characterized by violence, oppression, and discrimination, but also by survival and extraordinary endurance. This book is a collective memoir of my country's recent history narrated by its marginalized women.
The theme of loss and then surviving despite that free fall. And you mentioned earlier an abyss without the floor.
The bottom, yeah.
Right. This book is not just about the blast.
No.
And there's, I think maybe it's appropriate. A lot of it goes back to the free fall that begins post October 17. And yesterday was the 4-year anniversary. But when things are so bad anyway, anniversaries in this country they're either meaningless or forgotten altogether. So nobody really cares that yesterday was October 17. A lot of the foundational flaws, the way you see them, are written about here in this book. And it's scattered, different chapters. It's a big ask. But today, looking back in the last 4 years, I think it's even towards the end of the book, you say this problem is not economic, it's political, and it's about governance.
Yeah.
Let's go there as much as we can.
Yeah.
Sum that up in a way that makes sense to you. What exactly does that mean?
It means that there's an economic crisis, right? But we're not the only ones to have one. There've been plenty in Argentina, Brazil. And you are able to stand back on your feet if you have proper governance. And by that, I mean institutional structures, a functioning government or a change of government where, a party is gone and a new party is in power. If it's the right or the left, we don't have that. In the case of Lebanon, I am specifically hopeless because I think the problem is political. And that takes me back to October 17th because we thought that change was happening. At the beginning, I was very skeptical, by the way, because I also covered 2015, 2009. I was there, during March 14. So there were turning points in Lebanon's history that we thought were going to take us to something better, and it never happened. I know there's micro change happening in Lebanon, and I don't like to discredit that. It's just the macro picture is very discouraging. And I think that the election results, despite the electoral system that's been tailored to the needs of the political establishment, there was a tiny breakthrough, right, with 13 new MPs. But 13 MPs is not enough out of 128. And I'm very disappointed with way things have gone since their election. So this is to tell you in a nutshell that I'm not very optimistic. But then if you want to go to I there's a chapter at the beginning that I called a dysfunctional compromise. This is how I describe Lebanon. I think it's a dysfunctional internal and external compromise. And it's always been like this. I go back to 1860, to the Ottoman Empire, to the Mutasarrifiyya and قائم مقامي sorry القائم مقاميتين. And I show how
it's as dysfunctional as it's
they were as dysfunctional, and there was always regional and international interference at the request of various Lebanese stakeholders and parties. And it's, the conversions of these internal and external factors that make us so unstable and volatile all the time. I also talk about the sectarian system and how that's a problem, including for women. And I think there's a gender apartheid because of that system. So the sectarian system, the regional interference, always at the request of the Lebanese. I'm not victimizing here and saying we're innocent. And I think our major problem is the lack of citizenship and nationhood. I say that we're still looking for that nation that doesn't exist. To this day, we're not a nation, unfortunately. It's I don't know how you define citizenship in Lebanon. I don't think it really. I mean, what happened on October 17th, I saw the seeds of that being planted, and that was kind of encouraging. But I don't know where that is now. And again, there's micro change, but it's not enough. So I try in that chapter, Dysfunctional Compromise, to summarize what I think are the major political problems. Another problem I think today is Hezbollah. It's the elephant in the room. It's having a non-state actor with this arsenal of weapons. And today, whether you're with the Palestinian cause, and I think most of the Lebanese are, to be honest, but being dragged in another war is not a Lebanese decision. I find it mind-boggling that we're just sitting and watching what's happening in the south, and it's basically just business as usual. There's no government. No one can stop them. No one can say, we don't want to be part of this. They don't have that decision. And then the biggest problem, and this is what my book is about, impunity.
Yeah.
The lack of accountability is why this country is never moving forward. And it's what I end up the book with. If we don't have accountability, there's no future. Whether it's the Beirut explosion or the civil war or the financial crime that we're all victims of. If that is not, there's no accountability also now, then when?
If there's a climax in the book, I think it's in that section. It's part 3, The Impossible Quest for Justice.
Yeah.
And Tracy Najjar's story is one of those stories. That's, I think, where the emotions really kick in. And I got that from you as well.
It's my favorite section of the book.
Good.
Yeah.
It's so well written. So, I mean, I know the subject is tragic, but it's easy to read and take from it. Also, what you mentioned already, which is important, is that there has to be a reminder of women's rights in this country. And you do that aggressively, which is good. And it's not simple women passing their nationality because they marry a foreigner or whatever. No, you're going into religious laws too. You're going into marriage, divorce, all that. I think, and structural discrimination. I like that this book is dedicated in a way in that direction. I think it offers it a unique angle. Most Lebanese books on this kind of subject, impunity, don't really go there enough. So I think you did that, and it's an advantage. Allow me to pick your brain on what you said earlier, which is it takes me back to a moment we're both not alive to experience. You hint at it a bit in the book, but it's your parents' generation and mine. And I mean, I know I'm a little older than you because of AUB years, but we're both in the same generation. So we grew up post-Civil War for the most part, with some memory of Civil War. But I know neither one of us knows what it's like to be here pre-Civil War. We've read about it, we watch about it. Maybe sometimes we have nostalgia about it. We share photos about it. We pretend
that we know.
That we know. We assume what our parents are telling us is true.
Yeah.
Maybe it's exaggerated to a bit, but there's something there. I like what you said, that we're all watching, and this is real. We're all watching our phones. Probably in this episode, we're scrolling our Twitter and Instagram to see what's happening here in relation to what's happening in Gaza right now. And you use the word mind-boggling. Okay, let's use that as the template. All the other stuff we talk about all the time, the inefficient sectarian model that we still use, we haven't reformed. These quotas that are outrageous for the 21st century. And I like the quote, I think it's Nadim Shahadi, who's an economist, that Lebanon skipped the 20th century, which is true. We're in a way an Ottoman state even until today. Long overdue with reform that never happened. So let's say that's real. I don't know if what we're witnessing right now is natural to Lebanon. In other words, I think we're in a situation that no one wants. Meaning, I don't know if you said it earlier, we're not victims. We search for support abroad. I don't know how much weight that holds right now. I really think we're paying a price for being part of Iran's security. And that's why we're scrolling our phones. I don't think we're scrolling for any other reason. Now, this is a huge assertion, and I know it's not shared all the time, and it's debated all the time. But I still feel like the things you drew out from our history, and this goes back to the 1600s. Some of your writing goes back to Fakhruddin. I don't know if I can blame history and inefficiency and sectarianism for why this country has completely collapsed. It doesn't sound right to me.
No, as I said, it's also the regional and international interference. And, as we've always been part of political agendas that go beyond our borders. We have. But what I mean is that we somehow wanted this. We've attracted this. You're talking about Iran. There's a part of the Lebanese, there are political parties who are Iran's allies, and they're welcoming this interference. The same way others are welcoming, Saudi Arabia's support and interference. This is what I mean. But I totally agree with you that we are somehow taken hostage by regional and proxy wars all the time. I mean, the Syrian conflict as well. We were dragged into this. Did we really want to? I'm not sure. So, no, I agree with you. It's just, I don't think we're innocent.
Let me use that to actually talk about something that we thought we should talk about. And I had my pen at the quote and I lost it. Let me find it again. This book, for stupid reasons, is banned in the Emirates. Let me say that. Stupid reasons.
Yeah.
Now, I found it. It's
in the a doomed revolution when I'm talking about parliamentary elections.
Yes.
And I'm saying that Hezbollah is talking about Hezbollah and the Lebanese forces.
Let me get the quote.
And I say, yeah.
I always have it on my pen and then I lose it. Here we go. It's in a doomed revolution, right?
Yeah.
Here it is. Yeah. So it's literally a paragraph in a book that's 220 pages long.
Yeah.
Which is absurd.
I think they read every line.
Oh.
I don't know if it's
Are
this
they the
sentence.
ones that found the grammar mistakes?
No, I did.
You did. Okay.
Listen, I mean, my publisher was in touch with the censorship committee
Yeah.
And this is what they said, is that there's a line in there that accuses the UAE of funding and supporting a political party. That's the only line. That's the only direct reference to them.
Right.
Yeah, I'm very sorry that they did this, but then it shows that there's a kind of a zero tolerance.
Right.
And I stand by what I wrote. Some people ask me if I would appeal. I don't think the UAE is a democracy. Why would I appeal?
Yeah.
I don't think I would win that appeal. So that's it. People who want to read it will find a way to buy it and read it.
I think it's an advantage when you get censored by a country like the Emirates. Book sales go up. And
Maybe.
we can all read it online anyway.
Yeah, it's on
available.
Kindle as well. So
Right. So anyone who really wants to read it will get it. It's like censoring movies here. It doesn't work. Barbie became a hit.
Yes, exactly.
For no reason. It's not
people
that
who
good of a
didn't
movie.
want to watch it.
I went and watched it.
Yeah.
For no reason.
Yeah. Just curious. You become curious. Why
I'm
is
like,
it
what
banned?
exactly? I still don't understand. Why would you ban?
But I don't think those who wanted to ban it watched the movie, to be honest.
Ah, that's interesting. So here it's sloppily banned. There it's meticulously
No,
banned.
I think the UAE, like really, they check all the books. I was warned by my publisher that there was a risk. Apparently, political books get censored a lot.
So I'm going to be very diplomatic because I don't want to be one of those people that hammer you on this subject.
No, it's
you got
okay.
a lot of heat for it, so I'm not.
Yes.
I'm not here to make it uncomfortable. I'd like to read that sentence because there's nothing problematic in the assertion of the Emirates. But there's another thing that comes out in it, which made it a Lebanese talking point. Okay, so.
The far right?
Exactly. So, quote, the far-right Lebanese forces opposed to Hezbollah and now reportedly funded by Saudi Arabia and United Emirates have also gained considerable power. Maybe it's the following two sentences. There are two sides that feed off each other in dangerous ways. The country as it looks now is divided among those who support Hezbollah and those who want it to be disarmed. I think had this not been censored in the Emirates, no one would have picked up on this section. I think it would have just been...
I don't know. I feel like I was saying the obvious. And to me, these are two extremes. And they're the major winners in the elections. I was really talking about the elections. That was the context. I don't bring up the Lebanese forces, I think, anywhere else. Maybe in the context of the civil war. No, I think what bothered the Lebanese is that I called the Lebanese forces far right. I mean, what would I call them?
I think, let me be devil's advocate here.
Yeah.
But again, I don't want to...
No, go ahead.
All right. I think it's not the best choice of words. But this is my opinion. It doesn't mean
what would you choose?
Far
Christian, nationalistic?
Far right to me is Hezbollah.
Oh, I'm telling you, they're two extremes. It's the same.
So this is, I think, the end.
You know that the French far right used to come and train the Lebanese forces in Lebanon. I mean, maybe the discourse sounds more moderate now when they speak, but if you scratch, they're far right if you want to label them. Like they're Christian, nationalistic.
There's no adjective for Hezbollah. I think that's where it became problematic.
Oh, no, because I speak about Hezbollah in the introduction.
No, I meant, sorry, that section, I think the reason it ruffled some feathers, I think.
But if you want to read only this page and this sentence, but this is a book. It's not an article. I very much introduce Hezbollah in the introduction. I say who they are, what they have. Very much, I call them the elephant in the room at the end. So trust me, I think I'm very fair when it comes to them, and nowhere am I like... What bothered also some people is that they said, oh, you're putting them on the same pedestal. No, if you read the book, I am not. I'm just saying they're two extremes. Yes, they feed off each other. I'm sorry. And this is how the election was framed. A lot of people, a lot of votes, and I talk about it, were a reactionary vote, not a conscious vote. We're against Hezbollah or we're against the Lebanese forces. No one voted on a program or, on a political agenda. It was very instinctive, I would almost say.
I think there could be a potential misunderstanding for somebody who doesn't know the Lebanese political scene or doesn't necessarily have the attention span to look back.
But I explain it.
No. I'm being very... I'm not trying to be...
No, I'm saying.
I think it's certain words make it feel like these are two militias. One is less armed, one is heavily armed, one is, and use the word power.
But I don't say they're a militia and I don't say they're armed here. I only say that Hezbollah has the largest arsenal as a non-state actor before. Yeah. So
I think
there's
that's
a difference.
The adjective maybe in that sentence, I think because it's the way I read it, and I'm literally, I had to find it. I didn't know where it was. I had to skim and look for it. I had to do the PDF search.
Yeah.
Because it's buried. It's not the central part of the book at all. I don't know if they can be compared as one and the same or two sides of the same coin.
But that's, again, in my own reading.
Right.
And to me, the two sides, they're two extremes, and it's dangerous. What we've seen on the streets is also dangerous. Even during the October 17th uprising.
But Hezbollah has far more responsibility for ending
But
October.
both were involved in the protests. The Lebanese forces were also part of the protests. And they thought, they're, if you want, they're entitled to ride that wave and to be against the political establishment. I spoke to people on the streets. So, again, to me, they're two extremes. This is how I see it. And who came out of the elections really powerful? They did. Who won the largest? And I'm not talking about Hezbollah, but from the other side, they won. They increased the number of seats more than anyone else. They were major winners in these elections. So
right, but I think it's because there's a certain association with military infrastructure today and security like violence, and what we're talking about earlier. We're watching what Hezbollah is doing at the border. I think that's where it becomes, they're not necessarily two of the same. They're different. I think it has to be read in context, and that's. But
you have to read the whole book, because I don't talk about I don't talk about anything military here. I'm talking about elections and rhetoric and agendas, etc. So it's in that context that it has to be taken.
Let's move on from that endless debate, which I've been in for 5 years or so.
No worries. It's important.
Should we keep going?
No, we're gonna bore them.
I know, or maybe not. They're all listening, actually.
In the Q&A, I'll give you.
No, I want to leave. I'll leave before you talk. I voted for you. No, that's actually no. I couldn't vote for you. Nohed Mashnout lost. Oh my God. Now don't ask me any questions. You're a great writer. Okay, we'll leave it to the Q&A. And, I'd like to talk a little more about the book itself and the storytelling quality. In addition to impunity, you're talking about everything that this country lost since October 17 and the free fall. And the stories are dedicated to women's survival. So, and in a way, you hint at this many times that it's in our DNA. We're able to do this. We're capable. Civil society steps in. It's women on the front lines. During the protests, it's women on the front lines too. And we have a really important person in the audience, Jemana Haddad. I'm losing my voice now. So this is not women have been pivotal in change. So looking now at women's survivability and looking at the future, you've said already that there's a hopelessness in the air. Are you able to merge the two together?
Survival and hopelessness?
Yeah, in other words, seeing a country that collapses, but also knowing that women remain strong. It's almost like there's an not oxymoron, what's the word?
Yeah. I say that I never debate the fact that we're strong, but I think I debunk what I call the myth of resilience. And I say that we're strong, but we're not resilient. And I'm talking about women and Lebanese as well. And I think the narrative of resilience is very counterproductive.
You call it the myth of resilience in the book. Yeah.
I think the only people who are resilient today are the politicians. And I think convincing ourselves that we are resilient doesn't help, because it means accepting the status quo and accepting the fact that That's it. It's always been like this, and there's nothing we can do. It leads to hopelessness. And I think we're surviving. We're not resilient, because I did a lot of research on resilience. And resilience, the concept of resilience is your ability to adapt, but to better circumstances. It's your ability to live, but move forward. You're not stuck. We're stuck. It's not survival. Resilience is not survival. You can compare nature and resilience. When there's a fire and trees burn, but then there are new routes and new branches that come out after. That's resilience. So you need new blood, you need better alternatives, you need solutions, you need to get rid of whatever oppression you're living. That's resilience. But when there's an explosion and you just stand up on your feet and you start cleaning your apartment, and this is what I've seen in many stories, that's not resilience. That's just adapting. We're conforming to an unbearable reality. This is what the women in this book are doing. When you're, spending your time looking for medicine and how to make ends meet at the end of the day, that's survival.
So
when you go through trauma again and again and again and you don't heal, that's survival. That's trauma and survival. That's not resilience.
Let's talk about survival. Was it yesterday that you were at AUB, at IFI?
Monday.
Today's Wednesday. So 2 days ago, I sort of looked and I saw that Tatiana Hasruti was one of the panelists, almost like a moderator to the discussion.
No, she was one of the speakers. I suggested her, because she's in the book.
So that kind of survivability, is that what you're talking about? In other words, a woman is, and it's actually just after Tracy Najjar's story, she loses her father. He's employed in the silos.
All of his life. That was his career.
Yeah. And it's almost minute by minute recollection. He calls his family wanting his blanket because he's going to spend the night working.
Because of a wheat shipment.
Right. And then minutes later, he's gone. And the family spends days hoping he will emerge. The daughter, Tatiana, waits until they present DNA proof that he's gone. She's now a panelist talking about this at IFI. Is that the kind of survivability that you're talking about?
No, I think Tatiana is speaking because she's fighting for justice. All of these women have to fight. The families of the victims, I'm not sure everyone is fighting with them. That's the problem. But I think they are fighting. They owe it to their loved ones. And they haven't grieved. These are people who are not grieving. Tracy and Paul haven't grieved. Tatiana hasn't grieved. Some of them, maybe more than others, because they sought some psychological support. Tatiana did. But it's, they're not moving on. They're stuck and they're fighting for justice. They will not reach peace until that happens. And so, they need truth first. They need to know what happened. They need kind of an apology or a responsibility. They need to blame someone. And those who are responsible need to be held accountable. Only then can they start grieving and making peace with what happened. But they're still stuck. I mean, we haven't even reached truth. No one knows. Everything I mention is based on forensic experts, investigative journalists, Human Rights Watch. There's nothing official about what happened on August 4th to this day. And that's horrible for the families. It reminds me a bit of, those whose loved ones disappeared during the Civil War. To this day, they don't know what happened to them. They don't know where they are. They never buried them. They never grieved them. And, I think of Wadad Halawani, whom I mentioned in the book. That woman is still fighting. To this day, she's still stuck in that.
So if that's not survival, what is survival? And that broad...
Yeah, that's part of survival. You have to fight to stay alive. That is survival. They're fighting for justice. Siham is fighting to pay for her generator bill. It's like that. Syrian refugees are fighting for, to make ends meet. I mean, the stories that I have, or to stay safe. Migrant workers in the book fighting for, their economic and rights as individuals. Maybe they're fighting to go back because some of them want to leave and they can't. So I think the fight is part of the survival. You're not supposed to fight all of your life. What there are things that should be your right. This is what Tracy says, and it's the quote to her chapter.
Yeah.
I'm not supposed to fight for justice. Justice is my right. People here are fighting, to just finish the day.
Actually, it's more than that. Tracy could be an obstacle to justice, but justice should still be delivered. In other words, victims can shy away from it if they want to, but the state should still do it despite that.
Yeah.
So what Tracy is saying is fundamental.
Yeah.
We had this exchange at her, actually, you mentioned.
She shouldn't ask for it. You know what I mean?
And even if she doesn't want it, it should be delivered.
Yeah.
And that's a fundamental right that's gone.
Yeah.
So it's the battle is survival.
Yeah.
And survival is the battle too.
Very much.
Let's talk about your own survival and your own battle.
Do we have to?
It's 2 paragraphs. It's the end of the introduction.
Yeah.
It's your words.
Okay.
I'll just ask you to share it's this section here.
Okay. I have not yet made peace with 4 August. I don't know if I ever will. There's a voice in my head which keeps telling me that I could have done more that day. That night, I stayed at home as I could not get into Beirut. At that stage, I had no idea how big the explosion really was, how much loss and tragedy was out there. I wasn't sent on assignment until the early hours of the following morning. As a journalist, I feel like I failed. As a Lebanese, I also feel like I have failed. As a human, I feel guilty just for being alive. I have played the scenario in my head over and again. My daughter and mother were on the Port Road at 6:07 p.m. the night before the blast. It seemed so absurd that not only was I safe, but they were safe too. It is hard to accept. This book, these accounts, might be a way for me to process my own trauma and guilt and better understand that day, but it is mostly an attempt to make peace with it. I feel as a journalist, I owe it to all these people, to my country, to tell these stories.
So, it's thanks to insomnia. Thanks to insomnia, nights that you couldn't sleep.
Yeah.
Emotional about other people's recollections, and thinking back to your own upbringings and your family's own trauma. Thanks to those sleepless nights, and I'm going to guess a lot of coffee too, you pulled off this book. I highly recommend it to anyone in the audience. Get it. It's worth it. We will take a 10-minute break. I will run away from Jumana.
Q&A. There's a Q&A after, no?
You can order drinks if you'd like. 10 minutes, we'll start the Q&A. Thanks to everyone. It's a full house tonight. It means a lot. Thank you. Dalal.
When Jumana, she
Yeah,
wanted to
so since she's in the bathroom, let's start the Q&A. No. So there's a microphone will be passed around. Anyone who has questions about anything we spoke about, let's keep it civil because things are tense anyway. We actually got through a difficult subject unscathed.
Yeah.
So good for us. Let's keep it as civil as possible. Are there any questions at the top?
مشاكله.
Sarah?
Sarah.
Just introduce yourself and what you do for a living, who you're married to.
Is that necessary?
Hi, thank you so much for doing this tonight. Sarah Yassin, architect, activist, ran for elections last year in Beirut. I have a question for Dalal and a question for Ronnie. I was very moved by, of course, by the book, and thank you so much for writing the book. But I was moved by your openness, your honesty, and your vulnerability as a writer to share what you have shared regarding your personal story. Some parts were biographical, and also your own traumas and whatnot.
Thank you.
So, to what extent? I mean, I'm also in the process of writing, and knowing that Lebanon is a very small place. What was your intention in writing the chapter about yourself and your daughter? And did you have any? Were you intimidated or fear of critique? So that's for Dalal. And Roni, kind of a joke. You asked me to ask you this question.
Oh no.
When will you officially?
She's
This is a Jumana Sara question. When will you officially become a Lebanese Forces member?
Oh my God.
Why the oh my God?
Should I take it as a compliment?
No, but one on a serious note, one word that realizing I'm being a part of the October 17th movement, a mistake that I have done and I think the movement has done. Although I agree with Dalal that it's a spectrum and we're discussing two extremes, I have made my own rectification in my narrative, and I said that we've spoken about that. I cannot put on the same pedestal a thief or a civil war warlord with a militia like Hezbollah. And I personally, I would like to, in my future work and writing and with colleagues, I think this distinction should be made.
Let me answer it quickly and then I'll.
Yeah, go ahead.
I can't be bought, so there's no chance in hell I will join the Lebanese forces. The second thing is, I enjoyed our episode so much. I spoke to Sara Yassin the day she resigned from Beirut Medinati and stayed running in the elections in 2022. It's one of my favorite episodes, so good for you. And when are you joining the National Bloc? No, I will never join the
Tits for
Lebanese
tat.
forces. But I'll say one more thing, then I'll give you the mic. It goes back to the initial emphasis on facts and truth. I think that's where I come from. I can have an opinion that's quite foul of the Lebanese forces, and then share what you implied already, which is that it seems more and more like a false equivalence over time. But I think it's the question of what you emphasized earlier and then first person narrative. I don't know the words that would come out if I was writing this kind of book. So, Dalal.
Yeah, so your question, forgot your question. You were talking about that's the second part of the question, being critiqued or for being part of the story, right? This is why I was a bit hesitant, and I talk about it in the book, is that I always felt privileged, and I still feel privileged compared to these women. And I say that I've had the opportunity to use my voice when they didn't. And I was like, why do I have to talk about myself? And I haven't been through anything, as compared to them. I had this discussion with my editor, and I was convinced that I think it also gives a lot of credibility to the book because I'm part of the story. I've been affected by it. I'm a woman. I'm Lebanese. I interacted with these women, and I kind of owe it to them because they opened up and they were vulnerable. That I would also open up about my story, and I would be vulnerable as well. So it's for all these various reasons that I wanted to be, to write my own chapter. I mean, I haven't been criticized, to be honest, but that was my fear that I would be. Actually, a lot of people liked my chapter, and it's very much about my daughter also a lot. And the idea is because I mentioned my grandmother at the beginning, I thought it's this generations of women. It's like a thread that starts with my grandmother, ends with my daughter. And I'm kind of, me and the other women are in between because, as you know, there are different ages. The book ends with someone who's 86-year-old, but then you have women in their 20s, 30s, 50s, etc. So yeah.
Other questions? Jumana? Just a brief introduction to
Hello.
anyone who doesn't know you.
No, it's fine. My name is Jumana Haddad. I'm also an author, mainly. And I have a question for you, Dalal, and one for you, Roni. Dalal, at the beginning of this talk, you spoke about something that I'm very conflicted about and that I think about a lot. You said that when you went to Columbia University, one of the main lessons that they would try to teach you there as a journalist was to be impartial and objective. Personally, I don't believe in that. I believe it's a big lie. There's not one human being who can really be objective and impartial. You cannot take away your experiences, your own opinions, your thoughts, your convictions from, the whole formula and then present what you said to be the truth. Because there's also not one truth.
Yeah.
We have to acknowledge that. So, do you really believe in that? How objective can a journalist be? How objective should a journalist be? Is it a good thing or a bad thing? I would like to hear your answer, but let me ask Roni the question. Roni, same topic, the analogy between Lebanese forces and Hezbollah. Honestly, if you take away the military power and the amount of damage that each party can cause, which is completely, not comparable, and I acknowledge that, I would like to know how are they really different? Because to me, the real criteria when I'm comparing two Lebanese parties is how far away from confessionalism they are and how much closer to the idea of a so-called citizenship they can be. To me, both are far right. To me, both are very extremist. To me, both speak either about, even if they don't say it out loud, and many of them are smart enough not to say it out loud, either about being a Christian or about being a Shia. So I would really love to know how you make the difference between these two. Thank you.
Do you want to go first?
Yeah. So on objectivity, I think objectivity and impartiality are not the same. I don't believe in objectivity. And I think when you are a journalist, even when you choose the angle of the story, you choose a soundbite from an interview or a quote, who to interview, you're not objective. This is your own way of seeing how to, frame and write the story. I think what I strive for is kind of balance sometimes, just you can't omit the other side. As you're saying, there's not one truth, but there are always different sides to a story. There's not just one story, whether you agree with that or not. And my job is to tell you what's on the other side as well. This is what I strive for. But I think you can be impartial and still be truthful. What I'm seeing today is the media is not being truthful. This is the problem. And by truthful, I don't mean there's one truth, but just omitting what's on the other side completely and accepting certain, they're very selective with their standards. What we learn at Columbia or whatever, what journalism should be about, they apply it in certain locations and in certain places. But when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, no, we don't. We have no problem jumping into conclusions and, being an advocate of Ukrainian people, which very much for that. But I've seen the hypocrisy of European countries, even when it comes to dealing with refugees in Europe. I just did a story for CNN recently, and this Médecins Sans Frontières worker told me, it's a Ukrainian refugee would get his papers done and settled in the span of a week. It's not even as easy for me, and I've come legally and I have tons of documents, but bring someone from another country, another refugee, I'm talking about refugees here, so they have a refugee status, And it takes them forever to, get their paperwork and their documentation done. So there's a lot of hypocrisy that we're seeing. It's not just the media, but also the countries themselves, and the way they're dealing with all of these conflicts. And I think as a journalist, you have to point to that. And it upsets media organizations. Like, they don't like that. I don't understand why, because this is our job, is to show people that there's a duality. There are selective standards. If you have standards, then apply them everywhere. Don't just select. It was, it's my first time living in Europe, and my husband and I, we have this discussion. I'm disappointed. You grow up here thinking that, Europeans are all about, democracy and freedom of speech and freedom of expression and human rights. And then you get there and you realize the hypocrisy, and you're like, what the hell is this? You preach all day that you're better than us. But then this duality and hypocrisy is just unacceptable. The way you deal with foreigners, the way you deal with various wars and conflicts, your funding, where you stand. Fine. I mean, you want to condemn the Hamas attacks on Israel, please do, but then do the same. Where were you all these years? It's just crazy.
And we need to do an episode together. We should. Oh, God.
She's not as diplomatic as I am. I'm warning you.
Yeah, not as diplomatic as me. But everyone I know that worked with you had a great time. They're all scarred mentally and emotionally. They're all crying in Dubai.
Actually.
You do? Maybe I'll seek it from you after I answer this question. I'll answer it the best way I know how. Taking from what Dalal said, I'm not a journalist. You're a journalist. I'm not an author. You're an author. You set out to write a very difficult book and go down that difficult road of offering first-person narrative and historical context the way it makes sense to you. I have not done that. So I know I'm at a disadvantage already. I do think what Dalal said is true when it's taken to its absolute. We all make individual decisions that are subjective. And I think it really goes down to who you want to talk to and why. We're always doing that. But I think striving for objectivity is still the noble mission. And I have to say, I do disagree on one thing. I think there is one truth. I don't think there's multiple truths.
Maybe multiple perspectives, but like you...
I think, Dalal, you said it, there are many stories. There's endless stories, especially in a country that lost its agency. And there's multiple narratives too.
Yeah.
I think narratives in Lebanon today are often confused with fact. I think, but this is my understanding. I'll pick at it in a way that is also fast. Perfect timing for me.
This reminds me so much of August 4th whenever I hear ambulances. Oh, it's like all we could hear.
When it comes to sectarianism, there are many parties that are awful in that sense. When sectarianism is assumed to be a negative trait, maybe not its neutral meaning, not its descriptive meaning, but its emotionally charged meaning, these are extremely sectarian institutions.
Okay.
When it comes to identity, I can find many better ideas than anything regarding the Lebanese forces right now. I don't need to look that far away from them. When it comes to citizenship and understanding of what Lebanon is today and the role of the state, I do think, this is where I will diverge, I think what Lebanese forces were when we were kids is night and day from what they are today. And I'm going down the first person narrative. My fear of the Lebanese forces in the 1980s doesn't exist today. The security that they used to determine through violence, I don't see it as mainstream right now. I see it as isolated, and actually I see it as restraint. You mentioned capability. Every single Lebanese party that is governing in Lebanon had that capability. I think all of them go back to the civil war and were involved in different ways. Capability is different than what is happening right now. What Hezbollah has done, I think, is fundamentally different than what the Lebanese forces have done in the last 33 years. I'll also add to that, this is my reading, but I'm not a geopolitical analyst or a political one.
Neither am I.
I think the reason we're not in a civil war the way you're implying, which is multiple parties that can kill each other, I think the reason we're not at 1970 or approaching 1975 is because I don't think we fully understand Hezbollah. And I think this is a group that leans on the army to fight its opponents, and it's a group that can eliminate serious threats. I don't see the Lebanese forces acting that way. I do remember them acting that way, and actually, they were a geographic canton. They were taxing people. They had buses, almost like a semi-government. I simply don't see that today. And I think it's fair to suggest the 13 MPs that emerged from October 17, they were able to work with Samir Jaja to a degree. If they're willing to work with Hezbollah, I can't see them as positive actors right now. So I do see stark differences. And I think you said it, they are far right as well. Yes, they are. They're actually the definition of far right. But maybe in Lebanon, maybe we put right on Christians and left on Muslims, or right on, so maybe
Which has nothing to do with religion.
Yeah, maybe they're both
wrong.
far right, and they're both far right. Let me pull from Dalal's book. It's Hezbollah that is taking precautions in the port, not the Lebanese forces. And I want to make this about the book right now. I live in an apartment in Marim Khail. Actually, we're doing this in a cafe that was exploded by that blast. I have glass in my fridge. I could have died if I was in that apartment. It's not because of the Lebanese forces. So that's where narrative comes to truth. I can't see them as the same. Capability and intent and desire during anarchy, who knows what could happen in the next few years. I think we're inching closer and closer to a point Hezbollah cannot govern this mess. And this type of governance is not working for them. Let me add one more thing and then I'll stop. The moment you see a president in Baabda, and the moment you see a new prime minister, and the moment you see the currency appreciating, Hezbollah got something. That's how bad things are when it comes to their role in Lebanon. That is not the Lebanese forces today. They're not going to get anything the way Hezbollah will get. And I stand with that belief. I know civil society and the spirit of October 17 was to put them all in the same basket and say, Kullun, it works when you're protesting, but I don't think it matches politics. That's what I'll say. You're coming to Aaliya's very soon. But we'll talk about your writing, because your erotic fiction is far more interesting. Was it the vagina monologues? No. Shahrazad. Sorry, yeah.
Who killed Shahrazad?
In the spirit of the vagina monologues. Yeah. Other questions? And just say who you are, please.
Hello. Warda Boudahir. I'm a psychologist and a social activist. And I'd like to take what Dalal said in the book, or what I got from it. Sorry, I didn't read it yet. I just bought it. And exactly about accountability and what you were just saying. I think if we want to hold people accountable, we have to somehow stop giving excuses to some parties just because they are less worse or acting less worse than others. And this is somehow a debate I already had with you on one of your tweets earlier. And I think it's very important to remind ourselves, and this is my question to both of you, how important it is to really hold people accountable. And yeah, it's true, the port explosion didn't happen because of the Lebanese forces, but the Lebanese forces has caused a lot of issues in Lebanon. And they are part of the corruption. They have done so much bad things to
They're
the
part of
country
the port
that,
management too.
So
they get their share.
Exactly. So we cannot forget what they did. And not because some of the 13 people who reached the parliament did find a common ground with these people, it means that these people are better than the others. In my opinion, and that's what I'm most disappointed about, and this is why the only person I fully support up until this moment is Halima Kakour, is because she stood for what we talked about in the beginning. If these 12 people somehow still see that Jihad Azur is fine because he's not affiliated with Hezbollah, although he have done a lot of bad things in where he was and the position he played, then I think we're in a huge problem. So my question to both of you, I don't know who would like to answer it, but if we want to hold people accountable, we have to hold everyone accountable. We have to stop saying that these people should be held accountable before others. So how are we choosing our priorities? Is it that our fight is only against Hezbollah? If this is our fight and this is what we called for in 17 October, then 17 October is not what we said it was.
I'll start very quickly. Now I know
Yeah,
you're,
go ahead.
you're referring to me on the Twitter. Was it or Dalal? It was me. Now I remember who you are. What did? Oh, I remember you from Zgharta. You're friends with Shadin. She's why I came. She was introduced to me through you. Now I remember who you are. Thank you for reminding me of that. It's you're right to point at that tweet. I don't think Jihad Azawad is the same thing as Suleiman Frinji. No, I'm sorry. They're fundamentally different people.
If Samir Jaja, sorry. If Samir Jaja and others really believe in the change, then why won't they accept a name that the 13 people name and they support rather than
But
we
did
have
they
to support
name
their
anyone?
name?
But the
No,
problem is the
let's,
13 MPs as well.
I
The
agree all
problem
this.
is the political immaturity of some MPs, and I don't blame them. They've just joined, politics and parliament, and maybe we need to give them more time because we gave the others decades. But I think politics is nasty. It's dirty everywhere you go, not just here. You have to make some compromises without giving up, of course, on your values. But I think, Kaman, being so idealistic and so purist is counterproductive. Yani, I would have preferred if Halima and other people who were opposed to Jihad Azawad had worked together seriously to suggest a serious candidate, because they didn't. They were part of the circus that was happening in parliament. Yani, every session they had a new name and putting a white vote, whatever, a blank vote, or say, yani, what is this? We elected you to do serious
But
politics.
don't you
Mish
think
to
this
live
is
in a
part
bubble.
of they knew they can't make this person reach where they want to reach because the others didn't want.
But I didn't hear
someone
about
new.
any
Yeah.
serious.
Why
Can
would
I-
you name someone serious if you know that this person would not make
You
it?
Right. No,
I
that's
think
actually
you still try, you lobby, ما بعرف, or at least come together and unite.
that's
And I agree with you. It's I'm not defending the others, but Kamena, there's a lot of immaturity, and I say this in the book, and the way they've been dealing with all of this. Even when they were electing the parliamentary committees, it was a joke. It was a joke. Yani, come together on these fundamental things.
what
It's
can I
just-
say one more?
Just one thing, and I
You
won't
can
comment
answer it.
anymore. One last thing is that many of these 13 MPs did end up being not fully believing in we're not only against Hezbollah. Yani, they did show this a few weeks after they were elected. So they wanted to reach the parliament. They said things they didn't believe. And I can start from the people who were elected in my area. What Michel Douaihe talked about before he became an MP is different than what Michel Douaihe talked about after he became an MP. So in a certain condition, we have to believe that these MPs couldn't name someone not only because they couldn't come together to choose a name, but because some people didn't turn out to be believers in the cause
There
as
are
much as
serious
others.
political divisions among them, but I could see that even before they were elected. Yani, if you know the candidates and their profiles, but I don't think that's wrong. I'm also, I think in politics you have sometimes on certain draft laws, it's okay to shake hands or come together if it's for the greater public good, whatever that is. I'm not against that. And I'm against these people who are so idealistic and purist and they don't offer other alternatives. That's all I'm saying. And I agree with you. Of course, Hezbollah is not the only problem, but I think you're dealing here with, like, I call it the elephant in the room, and a serious problem. The others shook hands with it, and we should also hold them accountable, by the way. And when it comes to the port, Yes, I agree with Roni. They probably didn't cause the explosion, but they're all part of the power sharing system in the port, and they've all benefited from the corruption there and elsewhere. Yeah, I'll leave it at 2 now. What's happening?
Look, I'm calling them every time.
Okay.
You asked the right question. This is actually, it's the right question that he wouldn't have made it anyway, which is true. I think you said that there were not enough votes anyway for Jihad Azor. You're right. But there was a symbolic majority that was within reach. A 65 vote would have sent the right message, I think, the right message, and that change in opposition can work together when necessary. And that ideology, or you mentioned Puritanism or purist, that's not going to get in the way of putting a more favorable person in Ba'abda. And I have to disagree with one thing. The vetting for a regional director at the IMF that is necessary versus Bashar al-Assad's ally and Hezbollah's pick, these are not the same things. Halima Kakour makes it seem like they're the same things. I can't hear.
There should be a third alternative, but unfortunately, the 13 MPs couldn't come up with a third alternative. And as you were saying, some people thought they achieved the objective of just not allowing Frangieh to
but
win.
Halima and Cynthia and Elias, sorry, their first names. When you know them, you can do that, right?
Yeah.
Voted for Ziad Baroud for foolish reasons. That wasn't principle. That was undermining change and opposition working together. Even Brahim Mnaimne, who we know, was as principled as they come. He chose his words carefully, but he voted for Jihad Azor. I think, personally, that was the right message. And I don't think they're immature. I think it's just ideological. They see their problem as the establishment in every way, shape, and form. And even though we're 3 shy of a symbolic majority, they chose to go with a name that was useless at that point.
Roni, some of them don't have a background in politics. Yani, they're not as pragmatic. It needs time. I'm not saying, I'm not judging them after 2-3 years. I think it's unfair. We need to give them time.
But she's as new as Najat Saliba. She's as new as other people. And Najat Saliba was willing to make that decision. I don't think of her as better than Najat for that reason.
Well, I'm not saying someone is better than the other, to be honest. I think we need to give them time. But
more aware. I think Halima is actually more aware. Halima has been involved in politics longer.
Yeah, she has. Yeah. Some have. I'm not talking about all of them.
Anyway.
There's one more question.
In the back.
So to Dalal,
just who you are, please.
Okay, Eli,
please.
I can't say I'm an activist, but I followed all the movements from quite some time. And 2 things. One, for Dalal, it's good you didn't go to the port that day. You would leave with more guilt than you come down. It's because there's not much you can do. You will see things that, so I don't know if that helps. The other thing about, you mentioned Killun Yani Killun, and you mentioned also the 2015 protests. And my 2 cents, my very modest 2 cents is, Nike has a slogan which says, just do it. But when they want to create a new product, they don't just fucking do it. They do market analysis, they have planning. Killun Yani Killun was a great slogan, but trying to make it the de facto operational plan served the people in power more than they served the people who were revolting, because suddenly there was this whataboutism. There were no priorities. I agree that everybody should be held accountable, but when you're weak, when you're a nascent small group and you're trying to overthrow people with billions of dollars of funding, you have to have your priorities right. And I'm not saying which priorities they should have been. I'm just saying that this is something that hurt everything more than it helped. And to draw parallels in 2015, for those who may or may not have been there, a big issue that we had at the time was we went down for a protest for garbage that was on the streets. And then these guys suddenly wanted to overthrow the regime. And some of us were like, no, let's focus on one person or 2 people, like the Minister of Environment or the Minister of Interior, because then you have a better chance to make a breakthrough, to make your point. And then all of a sudden they wanted to overthrow the regime, which is, again, we would love to see that. but that's just very shallow, like you said. So the question, sorry, this was long. The question is, what can be done today? We seem to have failed. It's been 40 years. And again, I think كلن يعني كلن has been used by the people in power to just cause this paralysis and this whataboutism. And now we're debating what's the difference between the Lebanese forces and Hezbollah and who's on the right and who's not on the right. What can we do? This paralysis is terrible. And again, it has made people like you leave. The rest of us are sometimes here, they're sometimes not here. What have we done and what can we do?
I don't think I have an answer to that. Maybe you do, but I have to say I agree with what you said. I was there in 2015 and I saw how the whole thing was co-opted, and I think it was a very bad strategy. And again in 2019, I think that was the weak point, is the lack of strategy, a lack of focal point. It was good to be leaderless at the beginning, but then when, it remained as such, we lost the focus. I mean, there was the crisis, COVID, the explosion, all of these didn't help either. But I think somehow it all got lost because there was no sense of direction. We didn't know anywhere what was anymore what was the objective and where we were going. I don't know what's the solution today. Do you know? I think I left because I became like I have no answer. I don't see where it is. I know there's a lot of change at the micro level, and I was having this debate with some people on Monday that they do see change at the small scale level, but you have to be so patient for this to turn into something more tangible.
Before I try to answer, what are the micro changes that have happened?
I think there's more awareness and political education. There's a healthier public debate. I think the 13 MPs were a micro change. It's a result of the October 17 movement. That's a tangible micro change. I think the sense that no one is untouchable as well, without this leading to justice and accountability per se. Micro change, like, the work that it's been done in local communities, like in Tripoli, when it comes to de-radicalization, bringing communities together, infrastructure projects, etc. But then again, everything is happening not from the state. It's a parallel, it's just something it's a parallel system to the state. I don't know. I think, the elections were probably like a micro change.
Well, thanks for letting me ask you that, because I look for them.
Yeah.
I'll try to answer it, but I don't claim to have any authority here. Someone said it earlier, you're delusional if you actually are trying to predict the future.
Yeah.
I'm just my assessment. As long as there's regional disorder, and so long as Lebanon is not shielded by it, I think we're doomed to this type of destiny. How do you prevent Lebanon from being absorbed whenever there's a regional problem? I think that requires some international understanding that this country cannot survive otherwise. How it happens, I think there's a template. And the template, I think, has been used before. Divided countries were spared. We throw this word away so easily.
What, neutrality?
They were spared because they implemented it locally and internationally. There's so many examples of countries that did not collapse because of that. Even countries, their constitution is named after it. We don't have that. But the template is there.
And how do you reach neutrality, Anima?
Right. So if Lebanon, I think, is to see a neutral time in its future, it means that a Lebanese expression that's political locally and a regional understanding that's favorable will line up. The last time that seemed to line up, sort of, didn't go all the way, was 2011, 2012, when the president of this country was demanding disassociation from Syria. That's a Lebanese initiative, to the point Hezbollah signed on initially. That's local homegrown aspiration. It didn't happen, but the template is there. And also, we forget. Maybe we throw it away because we don't see it working in our favor. We have a Security Council resolution that allows Lebanon to request soldiers on the Syrian border. It's called 1701. 1701 hasn't been implemented.
No.
And also, add to that, you need to have the conditions, although Tracy said she doesn't want to see this, but I think it's necessary. Tracy Najjar in your book says she doesn't want a tribunal for the port blast. I think the only hope that we have in seeing some information is a tribunal.
No, they want a fact-finding mission. That's how you find out the truth.
The fact-finding mission is the first stage for a tribunal.
Yeah,
right.
for accountability.
Exactly. So that, I think, has to happen, even when the criminals are not arrested. And when the criminals are not arrested, it's not because we're flawed or we're born wrong. It means the state cannot go after them. You need to have those conditions met to begin, I think, to see something working long term. That's why she left already, I guess.
Where she
She's
has to
gone.
drive back
Oh, she has to go back?
to Eden, yeah.
That's why I think, in my opinion, I think the opportunity for a majority expression that resembles that was lost. That is, even though you don't like it, most of the room doesn't like it, that's the only tangible goal. No. Sorry, that's
No,
the
I
only.
think we all agree.
Sorry, let me say it again. The end of the sentence will be what you do. The only tangible goal from March 14 was a majority expression. That's it. A majority expression that got a tribunal that put some light on the problem. Tariq Bitar, the last time he tried to do that, there was no political backing waiting for him. We kind of just watched him disappear. When was the last time he even tried to go to his office? There's nothing. There's no investigation. I don't know. I see that as a template, and regional deals that happen.
But you're saying neutrality will only be achieved if there's like a regional, international, and local alignment, right?
Things have to line up favorably.
But I don't see that. That's the problem.
Neither do I. And I think I share the bleakness in that the conditions are not there. Conditions maybe could have been met, maybe, but that's all past us now.
Maybe, to add, maybe an electoral law that's a bit different. I don't know, Sarah, if you agree, but the current electoral law doesn't help. I mean, it's a miracle that 13 new MPs made it to parliament. This law is very, very much made by the political establishment to protect their seats. So I don't know if there could be pressure on that, a better electoral law that would push more independent people to reach power. That's another suggestion.
Question in the back.
Hi, I'm Rafi. I'm a feminist and queer theorist and researcher. I'm also Aaliya's event coordinator. My question is for you, Dalal. So I'm going back to the beginning of the discussion. I'm also going back to what Jumana asked. When we talk about journalists sharing truth or objective truth, I know you said it's not objectivity, but I don't want to get stuck on semantics right now. What we know about the media and what's happening right now is that what's controlling the narrative is Western media, and we know that these media channels operate within the confines of capitalism, within the confines of foreign policy and all of that. So my question is, in the face of the ongoing genocide that's happening in Palestine, what role does this neutrality in journalism play when it comes to lack of solidarity in the bigger picture, in the global picture? And how does one maintain integrity within journalism in this context?
It's very hard. I've been grappling with this. I don't think you can be neutral. I don't think as a journalist you're supposed to be neutral. As I said, you speak the truth no matter on what side it is. And if the truth is it's a genocide and there's enough evidence to back that, then it's a genocide. You shouldn't be afraid to speak up and to use these semantics or these words. And I think you need to speak up even within your own organization and institution. And there are a lot of brave journalists who are doing that today, even if they're paying the price for it. I always say, and this is something again I heard in journalism school, we can't stand still when there's injustice. That's one of the reasons why we're journalists, is not just to bear witness to what's happening, but to tell the world about it so some action is taken. It's indirect, if you want. There's a reason why we're called a sulta raba. Like, it's your job as a journalist is to contribute to accountability when there's an injustice, and your role is, that conduit for information and facts and evidence, etc., and to speak up. I speak up and I don't care. I've reached a point, I said this week, I don't care what happens to me career-wise. This is not why I signed up for. Like, I'm a journalist not to stay neutral in cases like these and to stay silent. If this is the case, I don't want to be a journalist then. And then people will tell you, oh, but then you're not an activist. No, I'm not an activist. I'm still sticking to information and context and facts. But I'm sorry, it's just, there's a lot of nuance out there that's just being forgotten and being lost. And no, I don't think neutrality serves. It's my personal opinion. Some others might disagree. And those who know me know I'm not neutral. And I don't care what you think of me as a journalist if I'm not neutral. I've not been neutral on a lot of issues, not just this. So I think it's okay to be engaged and to be vocal. And there are a lot of journalists in history who have done that. Yeah, it's you choose that. And I think what's happening in media organizations is shameful, to be honest.
Let's have one more question. The gentleman in the back.
There's also my sister-in-law.
Oh, your sister wants 2 more questions. Sorry.
William also.
Oh, 3 more questions. All right. So if William
Very
wants to, we're no? He wants to.
Do you want to take priority or should I go?
You got the mic.
People
Just
are-
say who you are, please.
So, well, Haj, I'll leave it at that. Just a returnee, let's put it that way. 2
Okay.
questions, and I think for both of you, they're fair game. Journalists, people like Cronkite, Mather, Frost, even, they played a role. They formed the electorate. They, as you mentioned, took the challenges, made people know what the situation was, objectively or not, but they kind of created an informed electorate. So how do you see that happening in the region right now, whether it's Palestine, whether it's even in Lebanon? Journalists do have a role to kind of inform the community, and then that can lead to in a way can kind of help create change. That being the first question. The second one is more, and you mentioned this at the beginning, Samer McAdam, you mentioned some names, others as well. You're back in Paris now. Samer has left. I'll even go back to 2005. Ziad Majid, for example, moved and is now in Paris. So there's a lot of people abroad who have been activists, who have called for change across the different situations that Lebanon has gone through. But one thing you see is when we move abroad, that kind of fades away. And that's not a bad, I don't want to say, I don't want to kind of frame it in a bad way, but you just feel like they lose.
No, you're right.
Something with the country. And, now more than ever, whether we talk about, politics, whether we talk about politicians and so on, they're receiving support, for better or worse from other countries abroad. So, you as a journalist abroad, how can you pressure, let's say, France to say like, no, it's not okay after 2000 and let's say, after 2017 for you to come in, for the president to come in and get all of them on the same table and give them validation? Where can you play a role in that?
On the first question, I'll only speak of Lebanon because I know the media well and I've worked for local media. The problem, unfortunately, is the funding. Is that so many journalists are.
Ooh.
وراحت الكهرباء وأخيرا.
Yay. The mics are still recording?
You can't hear though.
The mics are working still? Oh.
Okay.
Oh, but the speakers are not. I see. Okay.
That so many journalists today are dependent on media organizations that are funded by political entities, private individuals, foreign countries with certain agendas. So even if you don't believe in their agenda, your room for maneuver is very limited. And I faced this, and it's why I ended up quitting. So I think what we should do is we have to see how to support the independent media outlets that are out there. So there are a few, and I think it's hopeful, who are doing some meaningful work. It's just they're struggling financially. They don't have a backup. But other than that, it's a grim situation. I think the media is part of the political establishment. They're all in part of one entity, and they ride waves. Like we saw that during the October uprising, how some of them were now, the voice of the revolution, whatever. Look at them now. What are they doing? And I remember after the Beirut blast, there was one channel that said, "We are no longer hosting politicians. We're not going to give them a platform." Okay, that lasted. So I'm not hopeful as long as there's not enough support. And I say this a lot, and I said it in a talk in London. I told the Arab diaspora there who came and attended that we need to find ways to support these independent media outlets. Their voice and their platform is important. When it comes to leaving, yeah, but let me tell you this. I don't like to judge, what people do, whether they leave or stay. It's not easy to leave. It's not easy to stay. But part of why we leave is because we're so drained. And we've reached a point in our career where we have priorities, especially if you have a family. And I know Ziad, for example, because you mentioned Ziad. Ziad left before. But Ziad is using, what he does best, giving interviews and analysis to still speak about a lot of important subjects. I try to do this through my journalism. I wrote a book. But yeah, I'm not active per se, I have to admit. But I'll tell you what's the problem. For example, in France, there's no Lebanese community. It doesn't exist. They're so divided. It's you don't know who to reach out to. You don't know who's your circle. You don't, I've recently, after 3 years, started meeting some people, but I don't think we have powerful lobbies out abroad. And this is the problem that we have. And I'm talking about political lobbies, like Lebanese coming together to lobby, including for the Beirut blast, a justice mechanism. And I don't know where to start. I think there are a lot of egos, unfortunately. Even when people leave, I don't understand why. And I see this again and again. And that's why people can't come together. Everyone wants to take credit. Everyone wants to lead. Everyone's blah, blah, blah. We just need better lobbies. And I'm a journalist. I don't think I want to do that. I'd be happy to help. I always say, if you want help with communication or anything, I like to use my skills to help. But I'm not a politician. It's not my skill. But it's not very hopeful, I'll tell you, unfortunately. Yeah. I would tell you, I attended a few protests in France on the explosion. There were 20, 30 people. I don't get it. Everyone's life has been impacted by this, even if you were abroad. So I don't understand.
Maybe time for...
There was one more question, Donna.
Oh, yes. Dalal's sister.
My sister-in-law.
Sister-in-law. Sorry.
Hi, I'm Donna. I'm her sister-in-law. This one is a more light question, but you took on writing a book around a specific group of people. It's half the population, but it's still specific because no one before in Lebanon specifically chose to write about women and their point of view in a war, or it's always been this politician against that politician or this sect against this sect. While these women come from different backgrounds and from different religions,
True.
They all are women and share the same
Collective
trauma.
Yeah.
How did you build up to courage to start by saying, I'm going to be the one who's going to be the face of that, and I'm going to be the one who will write and be worthy enough to take on such a heavy, thing from someone who's wanted to write her whole life but was never courageous to do so. But you do have to have some confidence and some believing that I will be the one to...
You said it. You have to believe in the project and the idea. And I think that really it just came to me. I didn't go it's funny because I never wanted to write a book. It's just I left Lebanon. I covered the aftermath of the explosion. I was here. I've lived here most of my life. I've covered Lebanon for more than a decade. And it all came together just very naturally. And I just believed in the idea. And I said, I'm going to venture into something that's maybe risky. But I could see why it was important because, as you said, really, there are very few books in this region, history books, from the perspective of women. And as raw as, the way I portray it, which is like a lot of women narratives as is being told. And I got criticized, by the way. Why are you telling this from the perspective of women? Men suffer as well. I was like, what? There was literally a comment like that I got on Instagram. And I'm like, dude, I know men suffer as well, but not as much as women. Like, do I have to go through this?
They have libraries full of books about
yeah,
them.
and then history is always written by men. Wars, most of them, I'm not saying all of them, have been, conducted by men. Peace is conducted by men. We're part of this history and we're players in it, but we don't get to write it. So, and then no, men don't suffer as much as women in Lebanon. And if you read the book, you will understand why. But it is what it is. Like, people pick on all kinds of things. And I think, a women's perspective is important. And it's very different from a man's perspective. And those who are mediators, and I have friends who are in mediation, they tell you women bring different things to the table when they're like negotiating. So, yeah.
William, did you have a question? No?
Done.
Same question. Wow. Mind reader. Let me wrap
We're
it up.
done? Yeah.
I'll wrap it up. I've experienced the same thing here. The 2023. So this is the third anniversary protest for the port blast. Not many people showed up compared to earlier years. But to me, it makes sense. And the reason it makes sense, it goes back to a sentence in your book, which I think is true. The problem is political. In Lebanon, protests don't deliver political change. And I think both are happening at the same time to vast degrees. The largest uprising in modern history, and then the most disappointing political outcome from it. An earlier try 18 years ago, those demands were left unfulfilled. In the middle was a smaller attempt. It did not meet that much effect, which means to me politics is hijacked. And I think that is why we're always disappointed with turnouts shrinking and politics becoming more suffocating and perverted. But I'll echo what you said earlier, and the gentleman mentioned this. I think both are beneficial. You mentioned Ziad Majid. He's one of the first guests I interviewed on my podcast, and I went to Paris to meet him. I also went there to meet Nadim Houri, former Human Rights Watch director, who was, I think he's still based there.
Yes, he is. He
Arab
heads
Reform
Ari.
Initiative. This guy, I partied with him in Hamra when I was younger. He's an activist and he's also a delight. He's based in Paris. Ziad Majid, to me, is one of the best. He chooses to be away. My first episode was with my favorite storyteller, Ziad Douairi. Ziad Douairi will not come back to this country anytime soon. But Ziad Majid is doing his thing. Giselle Khouri did her thing here. And she left the foundation. It's going to keep running. Maybe she was working in Dubai the last few years, but she passed away here. So both are beneficial. I think, though, there's separate roles. There's the journalist, and that can extend to you, the author, who, even though doesn't live here always, has this country in her heart. There's multiple narrators in this country still. There's some activism that remains. I think that's the only tool left. It's narrative. That's what this book delivers. It's not your story. It's Lebanon's story told through you. We're all doing this in different ways, watching Lebanon fade. I think that's the only two left. It's narrative and it's expression, which is why I want to extend an applause to the owners of Aaliya's, William and Neve in the background, for creating this space and letting us do this tonight. Let's give them a round of applause. They're on MTV podcast with me tomorrow. So I'm going to be recording an episode largely about tonight at MTV. It'll come out next week. So you can get to know them both better next week.
And I want to thank them for reaching out to me. Rafi did very early on, and they were really interested in the book. And thank you for having me and for being so keen on keeping this event today, despite what's happening. And I think we need more spaces like this for dialogue and talks. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for endorsing my book.
So full circle. I was called in at the last minute to do this episode. I'll disclose that.
Yeah.
I read as much as I could within a few days. It was difficult to read it, even had there been more time, because it's a hard story to revisit. But
takes me to the fact that I really want to thank you. And we only called you the last minute because I thought, things were already planned and there was someone I didn't want to come and just present. And you were the only person I could think of.
So as a man, I hope I stepped in for women's shoes tonight.
No, you did. And I think it's important not to always have women. I've been on all women panels all the time. So, and I don't know if Justin is here.
Yeah.
He's hosting me in Paris. So there is another man who's going to question me on my book. So
let me wrap it up with a shout out to Justin Salhani. Check him out. One of the most talented journalists I know, who's currently with Al Jazeera. Wa'il Talib sitting in the back, one of the shyest guests I've had in my podcast. He works at L'Orient today. We have Jumana Haddad, a pioneer in her own right. We have Sarah Yassin in this room. Dalal Mawad, William and Neve.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Roni.
This Saturday's episode is cancelled, and Hamdoun Charles Hayek was the guest. He chose not to. I understand that. Next week, we have Mohammed Faour. He's a financial analyst and an AUB professor. And I hope this can keep going despite the climate. Dalal Mawad on Instagram, the Beirut Banyan on Instagram. Thanks.